Welcome to Interviews from Mexico. I'm Laura Carlson, and I'll be your host as we look at cutting-edge issues with the men and women who know them best, here on Telesur. In 2006, police were sent in to put down a demonstration near Atenco in the state of Mexico. But the police didn't go just to quell a demonstration. They went in to crush a movement. In the violent repression that ensued, police raided homes and beat protesters. 2 people were killed and hundreds were arrested. Many of the women who were arrested that day suffered sexual torture in police custody. 11 years later, 11 of those women have taken their case against the Mexican state to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. Today we'll talk to one of those women. Stay tuned.
Creí que desde mi quehacer como persona que acompaña niños.
We're joined by Italia Mendez. Italia is one of 11 women who have never stopped seeking justice since they suffered sexual torture in police custody after a police crackdown in 2006. Italia is not a victim, though. Instead, she's become a tireless organizer against sexual torture as state policy throughout the world. Italia, thank you so much for being with us on Interviews from Mexico.
Thank you for the invitation, Laura.
Italia, I know that it's hard for you to describe what happened to you that day in May of 2006. But we have an international audience, and I'm going to ask you if you could tell us what happened that day that has changed your life since then.
Well, remembering May 4th, 2006 is a very complicated and difficult issue. I was arrested during a police operative in the context of a grassroots protest. I was arrested along with 207 other people. The arrests were arbitrary, and then we were tortured, and they took us to the medium security prison. Specifically, what happened to me and my 11 companions in this struggle was that while we were being transported, there was a series of acts of torture that are considered sexual torture, including groping, being forced to strip, blows to the genitals, and even some were forced to perform fellatio on police officers. This was a gang rape by police officers.
It's a very, very difficult situation. And how has the government responded since you all decided to come out and report what happened to you in police custody?
Well, the Mexican state has had, we can say, 2 ways to take action with regard to what happened in May 2006 in Atenco. A good part of their strategy has been to call us liars and say that what we say happened to us never happened. It wasn't until, I don't know, around 2013 when the state changed its logic and then said, it's okay, then we accept that what you're saying really happened, and what we want now is a friendly agreement with an international court, in front of an international court. While our complaint was still being considered by national authorities, the state didn't do anything at all. And it's not that. When we went to the court, well, to the Inter-American system, first the Commission, it wasn't that the Mexican state's position had changed, right? They kept ignoring us, and there is still impunity surrounding these events. However, their position has changed, wanting to get a friendly agreement. In other words, to offer us reparations, what they call reparations, and to forget about the whole thing. And one fundamental point in our struggle is that we haven't had access to justice and that there hasn't been an investigation.
So when they say a friendly agreement, they're talking about forgetting about justice, not punishing anyone, and just paying you off, basically? What's a friendly agreement in a situation like this?
Basically, the idea is to, with some malicious intent on their part, they set up an ad hoc fund to have access to monetary payments, which we weren't in agreement with at all. Basically, they were payments for damages with no investigation, with no sanctions, and forgetting about the fundamental issue, which is access to justice. So for us, it was a very difficult affront to get this response from the state. And well, we understand that our struggle is going to be something much deeper than a friendly agreement. And we decided to continue with international litigation, even though that meant it would take 5 or 6 more years from when they made this offer in 2013. So, well, for us, it is inescapable. There's no way that the state could convince us that we didn't need an in-depth investigation of the facts of the events in 2006.
And you've been very firm about this. I think for a lot of people, it'd be difficult to understand that these crimes could go unpunished and not even be investigated. They're such serious crimes, and especially when committed by the government. If this were a situation where we were in civil society, and someone committed these crimes, it would be a major investigation and there'd be major punishments as well. These are policemen who have names and faces. How is it possible that they haven't been identified and brought to justice in this case?
That's right. Well, there's one fundamental issue that we have always tried to insist on, especially in the Inter-American Court, which is that we want an investigation of the chain of command. That is, not just the police officers who were present in the operation and the transport to the jail, but also who ordered the operation, who designed it, and what were the objectives of the operation. Because we're still insisting that the authorities of the state of Mexico and the federal government are politically responsible for what happened, that they are implicated and they have a responsibility as public officials. So in that sense, it's not being investigated either. If they're not even investigating the police officers who were actually there, they're obviously not investigating the political responsibility of federal and state authorities. So for us, it seems to be very important that the in-depth report of the Inter-American Human Rights Commission mentions that, and we think it's important that we are asking that in the system, the Inter-American Court, they do just that. Pay attention to this issue, and that the investigation should also be directed at certain political figures who everyone in Mexico is familiar with. They are the ones who preserve impunity. The use of sexual torture, like in Atenco in 2006, have been systematically repeated since then throughout the whole country, not in context of political repression, but in context of supposed fight against drug trafficking, right?
I want to get back to that point of how this is a generalized problem and has been most visible in your particular case, and also to the role of the International Court. But first of all, let's talk about who those people are, because you're up against some very powerful individuals. Who are we talking about when we talk about the chain of command in the state of Mexico and the federal government at that time?
Well, in the end, it's evident. The responsibility of the political responsibility of the governor of the state of Mexico at the time, who is currently the president of Mexico, and Enrique Peña Nieto, but also his secretary of the interior. And on the federal level, we're also talking about Eduardo Medina Mora, who is now a justice on the Supreme Court and who at that time was head of the federal public security. So it's a series of figures. It's important to mention that the Inter-American Court isn't a criminal court, right? And that finally what it can do is determine the level of responsibility of the Mexican state as an institution. So when we talk about the responsibility of the Mexican state and the federal government, what we're trying to say is that what happened in Atenco was kind of like an alignment of powers, right? An alignment between the fact powers, but also between state and federal authorities, with the goal of suppressing a social and political movement that was very important in Mexico, right? And they succeeded to a large degree in dismantling the movement of an important group, to such an extent that now they're building the Mexico City Airport, which is a much longer, more profound struggle, and it has to do with the political context of the state of Mexico, concretely, right? And there are too many responsibilities. We're not just talking about specific individuals, but of the state, right? A state with all of its institutions, the institutions of justice, the institutions of public security, and also, of course, the responsibilities of the executive, who is Enrique Peña Nieto, right?
We should mention to the audience that this movement that came out of Atenco was to block the construction of an international airport on the peasant farmers' lands. And it became a huge battle in Mexican history, and that's why this particular repression was so strong and so brutal at the time. You've talked about sexual torture as a state policy, and now you're discussing the way that it's the importance of bringing the case to the Inter-American Court to describe the way in which it wasn't just a few rogue policemen, but that the entire apparatus of the state was involved in this particular form of repression. Can you describe what you mean by sexual torture as a state policy?
It would seem that in the discourse of the state, which is a very misogynistic discourse, this discourse of collateral damage that argues that the police and also the military and the Navy in this country are carrying out this practice systematically. Well, we've had the opportunity to talk to many women all over the country who have had to live through the terrible experience of sexual torture by municipal police, state police, even investigative police, or members of the Navy or soldiers in context of patrols, in the context of security, in which there are women who are arbitrarily arrested, subjected to sexual torture, and who are forced to confess crimes that they didn't commit. And so we've seen this happen in a large part of the country, and it's a symptom of having the Army and the Navy involved in law enforcement, a job that they shouldn't be doing in the first place. But then also we have seen cases of women who have been sexually tortured by municipal police or state police, or even by officers from the unified state police in some states. And so that leads us to think, and we are asserting, that it's a state policy. Calderón, the previous president, declared war against a supposed war against drug trafficking, but in reality it was a war against Mexican society. And in reality, there's no method in this war. Everybody understood it in their own way, on the municipal, state, and federal levels, right? So these are the results, like I'm telling you now. Women locked up in jail, sexually tortured by agents of the state. We've seen this again and again. But it might seem like it has nothing to do with a political content. It might seem like it doesn't, but we've been discovering that also this horrible fear of repression in this society that has been fragmented by terrible state violence leads us to a situation where we're not able to demand our rights, to organize our movements, to organize society, and to demand the minimum that we can demand as citizens, which is to have security, to be able to move freely in our country. And we're not achieving that, but we're also very afraid to go out to protest, because we know that if we demand our rights, there's a repressive policy that uses women's bodies to send a terrifying message. They have carte blanche to do whatever they want to us. And the response of the state leaves us in a condition of total impunity. And that's exactly what happened, what we've been experiencing for 11 years. We haven't had access to justice. And if we remember what happened in Atenco in 2006, it was shown on national television networks, and thousands of people, maybe millions of people in Mexico, so how we were arrested, beaten, and taken away. It was a context of total repression, and that's the message the state wanted to send, the terrifying message that they wanted to send through our bodies, through sexual torture, was the message that got sent, a message of defeat to those who demand their rights, and the message was disseminated around the country, that discourse of fear, the discourse of terror that comes from the state. Facing that, we've been carrying on in our modest battle. We're just 11 women, and we're trying to overcome all the machinery of terror that the state has implemented across the country. And we're trying with our testimony and by speaking out about what happened to us, about what was, yes, a terrifying experience, to connect to other women who have experienced the same things as us, right? To connect with their families, and from there to weave networks of support, of mutual aid in situations where all elements of solidarity were destroyed. When you experience torture, it leaves you with a deep feeling of loneliness, and fragmentation, of sometimes I used to think that I was like broken,
personal
right?
Fragmentation.
Exactly. So to come back from such a place and to be able to build solidarity again, and to build something with other women against impunity and against this terrifying message from the state, well,
it's a political movement and it's a personal therapy at the same time. I'm sure to be able to get together and to keep moving forward after an experience like that. So we have the politics of fear, the use of brutality openly. I'm sure that they thought that all of you were going to go home and never speak of it and bear that private pain forever and never protest again. That seems to be the purpose of what we're talking about. And yet you did exactly the opposite. And for that, women all over the world are grateful. This is a serious problem that doesn't happen just in Mexico. And I want to ask you about how you decided to use the international system to press your case, and what happened at the Inter-American Court of Human Rights when you took your case there.
First of all, to reach the point where we could talk about our experience for us was like, it was fundamental to be able to take care of ourselves. It was like emotional first aid, you could call it. Being together, we were isolated, we were alone, and we didn't know each other. So it was a little just recognizing the pain that we had shared during those transfers. And I think that the first impulse that helped us carry on this struggle was rage. What I was thinking was that I couldn't believe that in such a context, so close to Mexico City, in such a politicized space as Atenco, that such a thing could happen, like what happened to me. It seemed completely unbelievable to me. So I started thinking, why'd they let me leave after this experience? So it was... In the end, there was a lot of work to be done. I did other political work, I didn't work against repression, and in this moment I started to do this. This protest became obligatory for me, to put it in that way, because of my experience. The rest of the women, it was through assemblies. We decided there that we had to fight back. We couldn't allow what had happened to us to go unnoticed, right? So what we did was to get our testimonies out there and to start this movement. The thing is, in Mexico, not much happened in terms of access to justice. What did happen was that we got a lot of support from many organizations, many collectives, many people who supported us, who listened to us, and who accompanied us in this fight. But in the national context, we couldn't get any access to justice. The state has ignored us, and even worse, they have re-victimized us. It criminalized us after what we experienced.
And you have to exhaust all the national level mechanisms of justice in order to take a case to the Inter-American Commission, the Inter-American Court on Human Rights, right? So what, did you feel like you got a fair hearing there? You were there just this last November, right?
Yes. Last November we went to we had a public audience before the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, and it was a space. I would say that it was a healing space, because our voices were listened at the same time as the governments, under the same conditions, and our testimonies were respected and listened to. Probably the state hasn't really listened to us, but the judges listened to what we had to say. There were 5 of us who we gave our testimonies, and it was an important space. There was a lot of international attention and international media. And then after that, national media in Mexico covered it. And so it was like, after 11 years of fighting, they finally had to listen to us. And if it hadn't happened in that context, I'm sure it wouldn't have happened at all.
Well, I wish you much success in your court case, which could be precedent-setting for women all over the world, and also in the construction of this very important movement against sexual torture. Thank you so much for joining us here on Interviews from Mexico. We'll be back next week. Join us.